Imagine spending like 80% of your week just taking screenshots.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right? Screenshots of every single drop-down menu and submit button you click, and only 20% of your time actually checking if the highly complex drug dosage algorithm you're working on is, safe.
Which is terrifying,
It
honestly.
really is. But for decades, that upside-down ratio was the very real, very frustrating reality of medical software compliance.
Yeah, it was just the accepted way of doing things.
Exactly. Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a comprehensive 2025 guide and article from Validfor. It's titled CSA versus CSV, Key Differences and 2025 Guide.
It's a really crucial piece of literature for the industry right now.
It absolutely is. And our mission as you join us on this deep dive today is to decode this massive industry-wide transition. We're looking at the shift from Computerized System Validation, or CSV, to Computer Software Assurance, which is known as CSA.
Right, the acronyms are very similar, but the concepts are worlds apart.
Completely. We're exploring how heavily regulated industries are finally figuring out how to stop suffocating under all that paperwork and start applying smart, risk-based critical thinking.
Which is a huge relief for a lot of people.
For sure. And we've brought in our resident expert to help break down exactly why this matters to you. Whether you manage software compliance, run quality assurance, or, just want to understand the invisible guardrails keeping our healthcare systems safe.
I'm really glad we're doing this because, it is a fascinating pivot. At its core, this isn't simply about cutting regulatory red tape just to save a few bucks.
Right. It's deeper than that.
Exactly. It's a fundamental realignment of intent. The goal is to make technology work for patient safety and product quality rather than forcing engineers to generate massive stacks of paper just to prove to an auditor that they do their jobs.
Which is what they were doing, right? Just generating paper.
Oh, absolutely. Mountains of it. We are essentially watching an entire industry attempt to move from a mindset of compliance by volume to, well, compliance by critical thinking.
I love that phrase, compliance by critical thinking. That concept completely flips the traditional quality assurance role. I mean, you're essentially turning compliance officers from proofreaders into actual investigators.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
But to understand how we get there, we really need to look at the friction of the old system first. In the classic CSV world, the focus was overwhelmingly on verification through exhaustive documentation.
Right. And the unwritten rules seem to be that the sheer volume of your evidence prove the quality of your system.
Like if the binder is thick enough, the software must be safe.
Exactly. You had these broad, incredibly slow revalidations every single time a minor software change occurred. The friction was just immense.
Because they treated everything the same, right?
Yes. Under classic CSV, companies essentially treated all software features with the exact same level of intense scrutiny. Completely, regardless of their actual impact on patient safety or product quality.
So if you updated a highly complex algorithm that managed, say, the sterilization temperature of surgical equipment, you documented it extensively.
Which makes sense.
Right. But if you simply changed the color of a submit button on an internal training dashboard, you often had to document it with the exact same level of rigor.
And that right there is what created a dangerous paradox.
How so?
Well, the validation process became so painful that it actively discouraged companies from updating their systems. They would literally run older, less secure, bug-ridden software just to avoid triggering a new wave of validation paperwork.
Wow. So the safety regulations were ironically creating a massive cybersecurity and operational risk.
Exactly. It was totally counterproductive.
Okay, so that perfectly sets the stage for CSA, which is the FDA's newer risk-based approach aimed specifically at software used in production and quality systems, what the regulations refer to as falling under Part 820.
Right. Part 820 is the key jurisdiction here.
But before we get into how it works, we need to draw a hard boundary around what it actually covers. Validfor's guide makes a critical distinction here. CSA is not for software that is itself a medical device.
No, not at all.
If you're building SAMD software as a medical device, this doesn't apply to you.
That boundary really cannot be overstated. If your software is actually functioning as a medical device, for instance, like a mobile application that actively diagnoses an irregular heartbeat from a smartwatch ECG reading, that software still follows the incredibly strict medical device rules.
The classic CSV rules.
Exactly. CSA is specifically designed for the software that supports your production and quality infrastructure. We are talking about manufacturing execution systems, quality management systems, and, automated document repositories.
Okay, so we're focusing on the factory floor and the quality labs, not the pacemaker itself.
Spot on.
And the foundational shift here is moving away from that volume and completeness of evidence and instead focusing on fitness for intended use. You only gather the necessary objective evidence required for that specific function.
Right. It's about right-sizing the effort.
Listening to you explain the old way, it honestly feels like the difference between printing out MapQuest turn-by-turn directions for your daily commute just in case you forget the way.
Oh, I remember doing that.
Right. Doing that versus using a modern GPS that only interrupts your music when there's an actual traffic hazard ahead. You are shifting from documenting everything out of paranoia to documenting what actually matters.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. And what's fascinating here is that the FDA is aggressively championing this transition.
Really? The FDA itself?
Oh, yeah. Because their own data showed that the old methodology wasn't actually making patients safer. When your quality assurance team spends 80% of their week formatting test scripts and pasting screenshots into a Word document, they suffer from extreme cognitive fatigue.
Well, yeah, anyone would.
Right. So they only have 20% of their energy left to think about how the software might actually fail in a real-world scenario.
Yeah.
The FDA wants engineers engineering.
Not doing data entry.
Exactly. They want testers actively trying to break the system to find its weak spots, not acting as administrative assistants for an auditor who might visit 3 years from now.
Okay, shifting to a critical thinking mindset sounds great in theory. But if an FDA auditor knocks on your door tomorrow, you can't just say, well, we thought really hard about the risk.
No, you definitely cannot say
You
this.
still need hard proof. So if you're a QA manager listening to this right now, you are probably wondering how testing methods actually change to capture that proof without reverting back to the old 100-page scripts.
Which is the million-dollar question.
Right. So Validfor's guide proposes a toolkit that mixes scripted, unscripted, exploratory, and challenge testing. How do you actually deploy those proportionally?
Well, you deploy them based on the direct risk to the patient or the product. You aren't throwing your old tools away, You're just learning when to apply them.
Okay, give me an example.
Sure. For high-risk functions, like complex manufacturing workflows, regulated calculations, anything directly impacting the final product, you still use traditional scripted testing.
So you still need the heavy documentation there.
Yes. That requires pre-approved, step-by-step instructions, full screenshots, and detailed expected results. The heavy documentation is totally justified there.
Okay, but the guide notes that for low-risk features like user interface behavior or simple configuration fields, you shift to unscripted or exploratory testing.
Right.
I need to push back on this, though, because if you've spent 10 years defending your screenshots to auditors, this sounds terrifying.
Oh, it terrifies a lot of people at first.
I bet. If we were just exploring a system, doesn't that open the door to wildly inconsistent, sloppy testing? Like, how do you prove to an inspector that John actually tested the drop-down menu if there is no screenshot of the drop-down menu?
That is the most common anxiety surrounding CSA, but it stems from a total misunderstanding of the terminology.
Okay, clarify it for us.
Unscripted absolutely does not mean undocumented. It just means the documentation is proportional to the risk. Under CSA, a concise test note is considered entirely valid objective evidence for a low-risk item.
Just a note.
It's just a note. But that note still requires a specific architectural structure. It must clearly state the scope of what was tested, the environment it was tested in, who performed the test, the results, and how it ties back to the intended use.
Ah, okay. That makes the distinction much clearer. It's the difference between writing a vague note like, I clicked around the menu and it looks fine, versus a structured log entry.
Right.
Something like, on Tuesday, John Smith accessed the production environment, verified the new site location drop-down menu populated correctly according to the intended use, and no errors occurred.
Precisely. You are capturing the who, what, where, and outcome without needing a 10-page script pre-authorizing John to simply look at a menu.
That saves so much time.
It does. And what is crucial to understand about exploratory testing is that it actually yields better software.
Really? How so?
Because when testers follow a rigid step-by-step script, they develop tunnel vision. They only look at what the script tells them to look at, completely missing a glaring interface error just 1 inch to the left of their cursor.
Oh, that makes total sense. They're just following instructions blindly.
Exactly. Exploratory testing empowers the tester to use their domain expertise and creativity to interact with the software naturally. That is how end users actually interact with software, and it is how you uncover those bizarre, unpredictable bugs.
Okay, but testing a drop-down menu organically is one thing when the server sits in your own company's basement. What happens when we change the environment entirely?
You mean the cloud?
Yeah, the cloud. Because in 2025, regulated software almost never lives on local hardware. Most GXP workflows, meaning good practice workflows spanning manufacturing, clinical, and laboratory operations, they run on SaaS, software as a service.
Yeah, the vast majority do.
I'm struggling to see how this works in the cloud. If my company's software is hosted on a massive third-party cloud platform, I don't own the servers. How can an inspector hold me accountable for infrastructure I cannot even physically touch?
They hold you accountable because moving to the cloud does not outsource your regulatory responsibility.
So you can't just pass the buck.
No, you cannot point at your cloud provider and say, hey, it's their fault. CSA addresses this by demanding rigorous vendor qualification.
Okay, what does that look like?
Before you put a single piece of regulated data into a SaaS platform, you must audit that vendor to ensure they have their own internal quality controls. And then you establish incredibly strict service level agreements, or SLAs.
Validfor is very specific about those SLAs. They emphasize that the contract has to explicitly cover uptime guarantees, disaster recovery backups, and mandatory change notices before the vendor updates the software.
Yes, and most importantly, unfettered access to your audit trails.
So what does this all mean? It is a lot like treating your cloud vendor like a teenage babysitter.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You aren't going to sit on the couch and micromanage them every second of the evening, right? But you absolutely check their references beforehand. That's your vendor qualification. And you leave a very strict, non-negotiable list of emergency protocols on the fridge, which is your SLA.
That babysitter analogy highlights the shared liability perfectly.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if something goes wrong while you are at dinner, the parents are still the ones responsible.
You can't blame the teenager.
Right. You have to treat cloud services as an extension of your own critical infrastructure. You define the controls, you meticulously track which version of the cloud environment you are running, and you rehearse your recovery procedures.
So accountability remains entirely in-house.
100%. And that dynamic is exactly what makes data integrity in the cloud such a massive focal point.
That brings up a critical regulatory intersection.
Mhm.
The guide stresses that adopting CSA does not give you a free pass on 21 CFR Part 11.
Oh, definitely not.
And for context, for anyone who might not know, Part 11 is the foundational FDA rule governing electronic signatures and electronic records.
It's the bedrock of digital compliance.
Right, so CSI doesn't magically dissolve the rules for how a digital signature is verified or how a record is secured. It simply helps you right-size the evidence proving that your Part 11 controls are actually functioning.
And when you are proving those controls in a cloud environment, audit trails are your primary mechanism of oversight. But applying the CSA mindset means we have to evolve how we review those trails.
We can't just read them line by line anymore.
Exactly. We cannot use brute force manual review anymore. The European Medicines Agency, or EA, along with the UK's MHRA, have both released recent guidelines supporting a risk-based approach to data integrity.
They specifically advocate for the use of exception reports rather than those manual line-by-line reviews. Break down the mechanics of that for us.
Sure.
If I have a system logging thousands of actions a day, how does an exception report actually keep me compliant without forcing me to read a phone book of code?
Think about a bioreactor logging temperature data every 3 seconds, alongside every single user who logs into the system to check that temperature.
That's a massive amount of data.
It is. It generates tens of thousands of lines of data daily. If a quality assurance manager tries to read that manually, they will inevitably suffer from fatigue and miss a critical error.
It's just human nature.
Right. An exception report flips the paradigm. The system is programmed with parameters of normal, acceptable behavior. It silently filters out the baseline noise of routine, authorized actions.
Okay, so what does it actually show you?
It is designed to only trigger an alert, an exception, when an anomaly occurs.
So if an unauthorized user attempts to change a critical temperature parameter at, say, 3:00 a.m. on a Sunday, or if a user fails a login attempt 5 times in a row, the report flags only those specific events.
Exactly. The human reviewer then investigates.
Yes, artificial intelligence. Here's where it gets really interesting. The guide highlights a massive regulatory movement happening right now. In July 2025, the European Commission and PICS, which is the Global Cooperative for Pharmaceutical Inspectors, opened a consultation on creating a brand new framework.
Annex 22.
Right, Annex 22 focused entirely on AI and good manufacturing practice.
AI is the absolute frontier of regulatory science right now. And Annex 22 represents a fundamental rewriting of the rules. The drafts are demanding continuous oversight of AI models, incredibly strong change control, strict performance monitoring, and mandatory human review.
But this introduces a massive paradox.
How so?
Well, traditional validation is built on the concept that software is static. You test version 1.0, you prove it works, you lock it down, and it does not change until you intentionally release version 1.1.
That's the old way, yeah.
But AI is famously a black box that constantly learns and adapts. How on earth do you validate a system that is designed to behave differently tomorrow than it did today?
You can't. You cannot validate it using traditional methods, which is why Annex 22 is so revolutionary.
Okay, so how does it work?
Take an AI model, optimizing a manufacturing process. It is constantly ingesting new batch data and adjusting its internal weights and biases. It is a moving target.
Right.
Therefore, you do not validate the static code, you validate the parameters of its learning, and you implement continuous performance oversight.
Wait, how does that oversight actually work in practice? Are you setting boundaries on what the AI is allowed to learn?
You are setting boundaries on its acceptable output. You establish drift parameters and confidence thresholds. Let's say your AI predicts equipment failure with 99% accuracy during its initial validation.
Okay.
Under continuous oversight, the system automatically monitors that accuracy in real time. If the AI begins to drift, like if its prediction suddenly dropped to 94% accuracy because it ingested a strange set of data, the system immediately flags it.
And then what? Does it just keep running at 94%?
No, it potentially halts the AI's ability to make autonomous changes altogether. Validation transforms from a one-time check-the-box event into a living, breathing lifecycle of continuous performance monitoring.
That is wild.
And the mandatory human review ensures that we never completely hand over the keys to a black box we cannot fully decode.
It is a staggering operational challenge. But, having explored the theory, the sauce complications, and the future of AI, we really need to bring this down to earth for the people doing the work today.
Yeah, let's get practical.
If you are listening to this and realizing your company is still buried in classic CSV paperwork, the obvious question is how you actually change course without grinding your daily operations to a halt.
Which is everyone's biggest fear.
Right. Now, Validfor's guide lays out a very specific 90-day CSA rollout plan. But let's look at the strategy behind this timeline rather than just, reading off a calendar. Why 90 days and why phase it this way?
The 90-day structure is entirely about managing the psychology of change.
The psychology?
Yes. If you walk into a heavily regulated company and announce that you are changing the entire compliance framework overnight, you will trigger massive operational paralysis. People will panic.
Oh, they would absolutely revolt.
Exactly. This rollout breaks the culture shift into distinct strategic milestones to build trust gradually.
Think about your own projects. You don't have to boil the ocean. You can take this 90-day blueprint and literally start on day one by just taking an inventory. The first milestone, spanning the first month, is purely about mapping and strategy.
Right, you aren't changing workflows yet.
You inventory your systems, flag the ones that actually fall under Part 820 production and quality rules, and you define your risk categories. You update your validation master plan and create a specific standard operating procedure, or SOP, for CSA.
You are essentially drawing the map of where you can safely reduce documentation. And that leads to the most critical strategic phase of the entire rollout,
Right.
The pilot.
Right, the pilot phase.
Around day 30, you do not roll this out across the whole company. You select one single real-world change that has measurable business value.
Just one.
Just one. You perform a concise impact assessment on that one system, you mix your exploratory and scripted testing based on risk, and you capture only the proportional records required.
Why restrict it to just one system? Is that to limit the blast radius if something goes wrong?
It limits the risk, but more importantly, it provides a psychological win. Your quality assurance team needs to see firsthand that the sky does not fall when they skip taking 50 screenshots of a drop-down menu.
They need to feel it working.
Yes, they need to experience the speed and efficiency of exploratory testing on a real project. Once they achieve that quick win and build trust in the new framework, the cultural resistance vanishes.
They prove it to themselves. Then, in the final 30 days, the strategy shifts to scaling and fortifying. This is where you close gaps with your cloud suppliers, updating those SLAs for audit trail access. You write the procedures for those automated exception reports we talked about, and you train your staff to actively hunt for anomalies rather than just checking boxes.
And crucially, you build an inspector pack.
What goes into that?
You gather your new SOPs, your risk models, and the completed evidence from your pilot system. That way, when an auditor eventually arrives, you hand them a comprehensive, fully functional methodology.
It is an incredibly pragmatic masterclass in change management. You
Huh.
build the intellectual infrastructure, you prove the concept on a small scale to win over the skeptics, and only then do you expand it across the organization.
That's the only way it actually works in practice.
So, to pull all these threads together, we began by looking at the fundamental friction of classic CSV, how the obsession with paperwork was actually degrading security by discouraging system updates.
Right.
We decoded the FDA's push toward computer software assurance, which demands that we right-size our testing, relying on scripts only for high-risk functions and utilizing the creativity of exploratory testing where it makes sense.
We examine the reality of accountability in the cloud, detailing how rigorous SLAs and risk-based exception reports maintain your data integrity, even when the servers are 1,000 miles away.
And we peered over the horizon at the European Union's upcoming NX22, exploring the complex mechanics of how continuous performance monitoring is attempting to lasso the wildly unpredictable nature of artificial intelligence.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Finally, we looked at the psychology of transitioning a corporate culture through a strategic 90-day rollout.
The through line connecting every single one of these topics is intentionality.
Intentionality, I like that.
Whether you are drafting a brief test note for a user interface tweak, negotiating an SLA with a massive cloud provider, or building an oversight program for a machine learning model, the goal is no longer to just generate a piece of paper.
Right.
The goal is to deeply understand your system, identify precisely where it could fail, and apply human intelligence to mitigate that specific risk.
And if you are taking anything away from this deep dive, that is the core lesson. True compliance should always be a byproduct of genuine quality. It should never be an administrative exercise.
Absolutely not.
It is about building and maintaining systems that work to protect us rather than forcing us to work blindly for the systems. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on that massive challenge of validating artificial intelligence.
Okay, lay it out.
We discussed how Annex 22 requires a shift from static validation to continuous oversight because AI is constantly learning. As machine learning becomes even more deeply embedded in these critical manufacturing and healthcare systems, ingesting new data and rewriting its own logic every single millisecond, will the very concept of a validated state eventually disappear entirely?
Oh, that's a profound question.
Right. Will the industry have to move away from the idea that software is validated once with a neat little bow on top and accept that software must continuously prove its own safety in real time every second of the day? Just how far does the GPS have to evolve before it insists on driving the car for us? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep questioning the systems around you.